Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Reza, your host today. In this video, we're going to talk about file handling using while loop and for loop. In this program, I created a file pointer, the name is file pointer, and then I use fopen function to open a file using write mode and the file point and return the result to file pointer. The result would be the address of the blinking cursor at the beginning of the file. So basically, file pointer is having the address of this blinking cursor at the beginning of this engm1081.txt file. Okay, let's go ahead and start writing a for loop. Let's do something cool. Let's use a loop to print 100 hello words to the file. I'll create a for loop, integer I equals to 1, and I want it to print until I is less than or equal to 100, and then I++ to increment I at each loop. In the body of the for loop, I'll add an fprint f because I want to print to the file, and I'll print hello world /n. And then, after the for loop is done, I'm going to close the file. And I'll close the file pointer. Okay. I see an error in Visual Studio if I hover my mouse. It said too few arguments in a function call. So fprintf requires the file pointer when I haven't specified a file pointer because it needs to know in which file you want it to print the hello word in. Sometimes you might have multiple file pointers open in your file because different files are open, and some results wanted to go to file 1 and some results wanted to go file 2. So the file pointer, different file pointer, can help fprintf function to know which file I'm going to print this statement in. In this case, only engm1081 is open, but we need to specify the file pointer in fprintf function. So if I compile and run this code and press enter, and you would see that from line 1, if I scroll down to line 100, hello world is printed here. Of course, we don't always want to repeat a statement 100 times. Let us print from 1 to 100 to a file. Okay, so you remember I told you that this doesn't need to be int, this doesn't need to be I, and this doesn't need to be 1. Okay, I'll change it to float and change the name of I to var1. And because I want to print from 1 to 100, I'll put 1. Be careful that this f means that this 1.0 is a float number. It's not a double number. And then the condition is var1 being less than or equal to 100, which is a float number, which should be a float number as well. And var1 equals to var1 plus 1. And that one is also a float number. Okay, perfect. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger so we can see all the code in one line. Now, in the fprintf function, I have the file pointer, and for the argument, I'm going to use %f. Let's actually put 0.2 to print with 2 decimal points. And we'll want to go to the next line at each line, and then semicolon. So if I compile and run this code, because the file will be rewritten, hello world will be removed. So be careful when you're rewriting on a file. The previous, what you have saved on the file in the previous program will be ignored. And as you can see here. So but what is happening is I'm just printing 0 because I put %2f here. I didn't specify which argument I wanted to print to my file, which is var 1 in this case. So if I say Control F5 and close this file, okay, you would see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until 100 is printed to the file engm1081. But we can use loop to read the files as well. So if I delete this, now I have a file that has float numbers from 1 to 100, from line 1 to line 100. So let's write a program which reads the first 5 lines and prints the average to the screen. Okay, to do this, I need to change the mode for reading the file from writing to reading. And I need a for loop. So in this for loop, I will create an integer iterator called I. My integer starts from 1. I want my integer to go until it's less than or equal to 5. And I'll increment my integer at every loop. In my loop, I wanted to scan, and from the previous video, we'll learn that fscanf function is the tool. So as the first argument, I'll put file pointer, because the first argument is definitely the file pointer. And as the second argument, I'll put %f, because at each line I'm going to read a %f, and I'm going to put that %f inside a variable. Let's call it var1. And you see that there's an error because I haven't declared var1 anywhere in my code. So I'll go up here and float var1. I also declare another float to store the summation, because we need to average these numbers, and I'll initialize it to 0. Okay, so if I put semicolon here, at each line I'm reading var1. To make sure, I'll put a breaking point here and start debugging my code. Okay, so I is 1, sum is 0, and var doesn't have any value at the beginning. If I step over this line, you see var is 1, which is expected from line 1. And if I step over, I would be 2, and as you can see, var1 is 2, and go on. And the loop ends when I equals to 5. So I see that my fscanf function reads var1 for me. So at each run, at each loop, I want to add sum to the variable, not sum f, sum to variable 1. And then I wanted to store the result in sum, because I want the variable sum to be the summation of the first 5 float numbers in the file. So if I start debugging, I don't have a breaking point. If I put a breaking point here and start debugging, step over. So you see now sum is 1, and when we read the second line and add it to sum will be 3. And if I step over again, 6, and then 10, and then 15, and that's the end of the loop. Okay, so after the loop, so dividing sum by 5 will be the average that we're looking for. So I want to print this on the screen. So I'll add a printf function the average is %f, and I'll move the calculation of average here. So instead of this %f, sum divided by 5, which is the average, will be printed on the screen. One thing to remember that we haven't closed the file. We can close the file before printf because that's the last line that we wanted to use the file. So f close, file pointer, and semicolon. Perfect. Okay, let me stop debugging here, remove the breaking point, and compile the code. I need a /n here to go to the next line. Control F5. And as you can see, the average is 3, which is expected. 15 divided by 5 is 3. What if I want to print this line on another file and some sort of an output file? Okay, I'll create another file pointer. Let's actually make this input. So this file pointer is my input, and I'll create another one, but the file pointer name is output. Again, these are just name. You can name it anything you want. And Visual Studio says I don't know what is file pointer, of course, because I changed it to input. And of course for this one. So the input one is the one that we are using to read from. Now we have the output one as well. So I need to open the file for writing. So here, after I close the input file, file pointer output equals to f open result dot out. You can put any extension you want, and then the mode is we wanted to open it for writing. And then I'll change this printf function to fprintf. So now I'm printing to a file, but I have to specify the file pointer. So this time the file pointer is file pointer out. It's not file pointer in. And then now I'm printing this into the output file, which is result.out. And be careful to close your file. So f close file pointer out. If I compile and run this code, you'll see that everything is working. If I open the File Explorer on this project, you would see that the result.out is also here. Let me open it here. You see that the average is 3 is printed in the file. So now in this program, I opened, let me make it a little bit smaller so you can see the whole program. So I created 2 file pointers, one for input file and one for output file. I opened the txt file that we wanted to read using the fopen function and return the beginning of the file to the file pointer input, and used it in a for loop to scan the first 5 numbers in the file. And then I closed the file and used the data that I read to calculate the average. And then I placed the average in another file. I store the beginning of that file into a file pointer output, and I used fopen function to create a file this time, result.out, with mode W. And in fprintf function, using the file pointer output, I printed the statement the average is %f, and instead of %f, I put the average argument, which is in this case sum divided by 5. And then I closed that file as well. Sometimes we don't know the length of the file, and we wanted to read every line in that file. In that case, we better use while loop. To do that, we want to use while loop. Because if you remember in the while loop video, I said that we want to use while loop when the condition changes in the program. So here, let me write a while loop. And let me write an infinite while loop. While 1 means that the condition is always true, so this while loop will always run. And let me tell you something. All the functions in the stdio library has a return value. The return value of the scanf function is that was I successful or not. So it will tell you that was I successful in reading %f or not. So if I create an integer here and call it scanf return and equal to the scanf function, in this line I will see how the value of scanf return will change. If I put a breaking point here and compile this code and debug this code, okay, you see that I have 3 numbers in my angm1081.txt. And here, the first line hasn't been executed yet, so sum is 0 and var1 doesn't have any value. If I step over, var1 will have its value. And as you can see, the scanf return is 1, which means it's true. I was able to read the %f you were asking for. And if I step over to do another loop, it's still 1 because it's reading the second value. And this time it's reading the third value. Now that's the last one. There is no float number in the file. I expect that something will happen if I go to another loop. And yes, scanf return -1, which means that I reached to the end of the file. And now it cannot continue your code. So what will happen here in my code, because the while loop condition is true, it will continue forever. But we need to stop it because the program is not correct. What I want to do is I want to do this inside the condition of my program. So inside the condition, I will use scanf function to read a line. And if the result was -1, I know that it's the end of the file, and that's the condition that I don't want it to run the code. But we said, so if it's not equal to -1, I want this code to continue scanning line by line by line. I don't need this line here anymore. So what will happen here in the while loop? Let me put a breaking point here and debug the program. So at first, the scanf function will be executed, and we will read variable 1 and store it into var1. Let me step over this line, and as you can see, and the function here, fscanf returned 1, and var1 is 1. So the var1 is, first thing happens is this function is executed. And then the return of this function is being compared to -1. 1 is not equal to -1, so the condition is true. While the condition is true, this loop will continue running. If I step over, sum will be equal to sum plus var1. And next we'll go to the while loop line again. And if I step over, you would see that fscanf returned 1. The function returned 1. And now the value of var1 changed to 2, which is the float number we had in the second line. And this continues until, if I go to the next loop, the value of fscanf return is -1. Now -1 is not equal to -1. No, it is equal to -1. So the return of this condition is false. It means that the body of the for loop would not be executed. And if I step over, we'll go into line 22, which is exactly what we expected to. But the point is, I don't want to divide it by 5. I wanted to divide it by the number of lines. How to do that? I'm going to declare another, let's just stop debugging first. I'm going to declare another integer and call it n. And n is initialized as 0. And now at each line, whenever I'm reading a var, which means whenever I'm reading a line, I wanted to add 1 to n and store it again back to n. So if we debug this code, you would see that n is changing by the lines that we are reading. And n will be 3 when we reach to the end of the line, which is the return of a scanf function -1. So the return of a scanf function is important for us. We can monitor when we reach to the end of the file with it. And to make this code more clear, much easier to read, I can change this to EOF. And when I change it to EOF, you see that automatically it will change color because it means that C knows this. Well, let's see what is EOF. If I hover my mouse on EOF, let's get out of debug mode for a second. Visual Studio says it's hash define EOF -1. It means that somebody in stdio library created a compiler variable called EOF and said that it is equal to -1. So during compile time, whatever EOF you have in your code will be changed and replaced by -1, which is what we had before. But the good thing with EOF is when I read your code and you say EOF here, I know, okay, this programmer wanted to scan this file pointer until the end of the file. Let's bring back our original file, which was 100 lines. And for the average, I want to divide the number of the lines that we're reading, number of the float values that we are reading. So I'll divide it by n. If I compile and run this code, you see that the average is 50.5, which is expected. Okay, so let's put a debugging point here. Just wanted to show you that everything is working. F5 to debug the code. And as you can see, n is 100, sum is 5050, and var1 is 100, which is the last float number we had in our file. This concludes today's video. In this video, we talked about file handling using for loop and while loop in C programming. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video. And thank you for watching. As always, see you in the next episode.